following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Welcome to Gate City Chronicles. I'm Kevin Avard, your host, and today, well, another politician's coming on our show, and I'm really proud to introduce Mr. Rubens. You're James Rubens.
Good afternoon.
And you're running for a Senate seat here in New Hampshire.
United States Senate, 2014, the Republican nomination.
Well, welcome to the show, and we're interested in hearing what you have to say. So you've served in the New Hampshire House or the New Hampshire Senate at some point?
Yeah, I served in the New Hampshire Senate in the 90s. I represented the Upper Valley over near the Connecticut River, a fairly moderate district in the state. I'm probably the last Republican to get elected over in that area.
Yeah.
I found that I could appeal to folks. I ran on Senate Bill 2 voting, which allowed towns and school districts the options of having all-day voting. I ran on charter schools in my first year in office. I wrote and passed the state's charter school law, did quite a bit of things. I was chair of the Education Committee. I wrote a victim restitution law, which became law my first time out. So I found that I could be very productive by really understanding issues, working with people. Problems can be solved. Amazingly, government can move forward.
Right. Now, you served under what administration? What time?
Governor Merrill and Governor Shaheen. I served alongside Senator Shaheen, and then she became governor, and then I ran against her when I ran for governor in 1998.
Yeah.
Here I am again.
Well,
yeah.
And what drew you to run for this particular seat?
United States Senate. The country is burning down fiscally. During the incumbent's term of office, just in 4.5 years, this country has amassed another $6 trillion in debt. We cannot continue down this road. We cannot continue another 6 years, 8 years, amassing debt in this fashion. We're now at 105% of gross domestic product. Debt relative to the size of the American economy. That's a red flashing danger signal, and the rate of increase slows a little bit. It continues to increase over the next 3 and 5 years, and then it skyrockets. It goes to the moon. And so we've got to address long-term fundamental structural problems in spending, and it requires any responsible politician running for office to touch the third rail. What is the third rail? It's Medicare, Social Security. We need to find a way to address the cost explosion. It's driven by the cost of health care. We're #1 in the world per capita in spending. The results in the United States, health status, health outcomes in our medical system is about average in the industrial world. So we're spending too much. The results are not good enough, driving the long-term budget deficits. We need to get federal spending under control. The incumbent seems blithe to the whole problem.
What happens when interest rates start going up?
It becomes worse. If interest rates, market rates for interest, by the way, I should say I've started and run 10 businesses. I'm a venture investor, so I know how to read balance sheets. When interest rates go to market levels, which right now are in the 4 to 5% range for a 10-year bond, the cost of financing the $16.7 trillion of present government debt is going to begin to swallow up our ability to do all other things we need to do. We do need R&D at the federal level. We need to maintain our highways. And if we allow Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest on the national debt, we'll have no ability within 10 years to pay for anything else in the entire. So the debt, spending, and deficit problem is at emergency levels.
There'll be no can to kick. There'll be no can to kick down the road.
Right, right.
This is something that we all have to. You can't turn a blind eye to this.
Right.
And if we do, I mean, that's just one of the problems. I know that, you know, we're looking at this Common Core, we're looking at Obamacare, we're looking at the border security, and I've constantly got a lump in my throat over these issues because I don't think they're being handled right. I don't think Obamacare was the right answer.
Well, going back to that first issue, the debt deficit problem, Obamacare addressed a couple of three issues that bug Americans, the fact that some people can't get insurance, pre-existing conditions, young people. Those are fixes, but Obamacare is so much more than that. The biggest problem with it, it doesn't resolve the cost problem of health care.
No,
it drives up the cost of health care. It's going to bring it up. We're at 18% of gross domestic product right now spending on health care, highest in the world, again. And it's going to drive it up to about 19.5% over the next 10 years. So instead of dealing with the cost and quality problem, it simply bureaucratizes medicine. It's created intense chaos among small business. I've been on the phone talking with folks over the last 3 weeks since beginning this exploratory campaign. For US Senate, I'm finding small business people have stopped hiring. They're in a state of serious they don't know what's going to happen. They're cutting back their employees from full-time to 29 hours to deal with, so it's creating immense market distortions. Governor Shaheen, when she was governor of this state, helped pass a bill, it used to be called Senate Bill 711, which imposed community rating on the state. We used to have 20-plus insurance companies, health insurance companies in the state, and that bill drove it down within a couple of years down to only 3-ish or 4-ish insurance companies.
And we know that competition lowers the price.
It gives consumers choice, and we had competition, and they've put the same problem, they've put community rating in Obamacare. And so they've driven up the cost, after January 1st of this coming year, they've driven up the cost of insurance for young people because of the community rating bans in Obamacare to the point where young people have to be cajoled and coaxed with a marketing program that Obamacare is funding and is ongoing right now to cause young people to buy insurance at 3 or 5 times what it would actually cost in a competitive marketplace. So it's terribly distorting to the health care. But the biggest problem is it does not deal with the cost and quality problem in health care.
Speaking of that, Kathleen Sebelius.
Yeah.
We just seen recently this little girl who needed a lung transplant.
Yep.
A bureaucrat was in charge of the decision making.
Yeah.
They actually had to go to the courts to get an injunction.
I saw that.
So that this young lady could get some health care.
Right.
And all I can see is, oh my gosh, now that once this is fully implemented, we're going to have politicians saying you can have a lung transplant or you can't.
Yeah, if you believe in a bureaucratic model of medicine, then you wind up having to have bureaucrats design what medical services are available to you and what are not. I'm not going to get into a detailed discussion of that, but it doesn't conform with American preferences for access to medical care of their choice.
Right.
So Obamacare moves us in the wrong direction. We need to be consistent with American preferences for freedom of choice.
What would you do?
Yeah.
Would you vote for a repeal of it, or can you modify a beast already that's there?
Yeah, there have been, 37, 38 attempts to repeal in the House, in the U.S. House. They have not gone through the Senate. I don't believe, to be honest, we will be able to repeal it. What we should be talking about is fixing its massive defects. And at the core of these defects, if I've mentioned, is we have a long-term, serious structural deficit problem in the U.S. driven by the cost of health care. We need to reform health care in a variety of ways that brings down the cost, brings up the quality, consistent with consumer choice, consistent with innovation in the medical marketplace. I'll just give you 2 examples of things that I believe Americans would accept, and this is what I mean when I say I'm going to touch the third rail of American politics, which is Medicare,
right.
Social Security. We have to touch it because it's the only way to be honest with the American public. Two examples. We need to end frivolous litigation that drives up the cost of medicine. We know that frivolous litigation causes people who provide medical care to practice defensive medicine.
That's tort reform, right?
Tort reform, it drives up the cost of medicine by between 1% and 5%, depending on which numbers you believe. That's big numbers. Example number 1, the Democrats will not go there. We have to go there. Obamacare did not deal with that issue. We know it will help bring down the cost of health care. Example number 2, and Republicans won't go here. They filibustered this in the Senate routinely, but we have to do this. We have to allow and require the federal government to negotiate for the prices of pharmaceuticals. The federal government purchases almost half of all pharmaceuticals in America. That's buying power, immense buying power. require and allow the federal government, our Medicaid, Medicare providers, the government that makes these purchases, to negotiate so that people don't buy medicines from Canada. We could save between $30 and $50 billion a year, up to $50 billion a year, if the federal government could negotiate for pharmaceuticals. So those are two examples among several things that we can do to bring down the cost of health care, which is what Obamacare failed to do. We've all known about these issues. They're politically very difficult. We have to put our belly up to the bar and deal with these things. There are a number more things that I'll be proposing as the campaign unfolds to deal with this third rail problem.
Well, one of the things that we're worried about these days, it seems, from layman's terms, you know, people are really concerned about a lot of the corruption that we're seeing. And I think we're actually getting numb to it. But one of the big concerns with, and we can move on to a different topic, but with the Obamacare is the IRS actually being in charge of this monstrosity. And the potential, it doesn't matter who's in power, it could be Democrat, could be Republican, for them to start using that tool as a political weapon. And that scares the heck out of me.
Right. Yeah, we have seen, this is part and parcel of government that has become quite a bit too intrusive when we have the government, we now know, reading my emails, looking at my Facebook's postings, some of which are private. And now, if I'm a terrorist and there is probable cause to investigate my emails, hallelujah, do it. But there is no probable cause for over 100 million Americans to have their emails read by a computer algorithm run by the federal government, which, like the IRS, could be hijacked for political purposes to harass an American. That's why we have the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution, to protect us against overweening government. So,
I would think they'd be a little bit more concerned with, I mean, they actually, if we're looking at border security, that's another issue. That's actually facing the Senate right now. They're pushing through. I'm always worried when they're in a rush. Come on, guys. You're taking your time on fixing the budget, but you're in a rush to get this passed.
Read the bill.
Yeah. What's in it, right? Well, the first part of it looks pretty good. But then you go into the other part, it basically nullifies everything in the first part. And I'm thinking, what are you guys doing? What is the Senate doing here? I mean, there's signs out in the desert that say, hey, this way. That troubles me. Well, I know it troubles a lot of other people.
There are real problems with American immigration. If you look at the approach that Canada takes with immigration, they invite immigrants who have capital and skills that would help the Canadian economy grow and prosper. You want to bring in, we have people come to America for our higher education services. We have the best higher education system in the world. People come here. If brilliant people come here, they ought to be allowed to stay here, work, grow companies, make jobs for Americans.
There's no problem with that.
That's the kind of immigration form. It's in the package. The Senate is dealing with this. At the same time, we need to secure our borders. The Senate is attempting to deal with that. There is a great concern among Americans that if we give people, in essence, a free pass, the 11 million, that's the number estimated, who came here illegally, a free pass, before the border is actually secured, we'll run into the same problem we ran into in 1984. We let the 3 million in, the border never got dealt with. People are concerned about checks for people who've come into the country legally and overstay their visa. We need an in-place system to monitor and secure that part of our immigration system. And finally, one other issue that concerns me about this, that I don't know how this gets resolved. This is my second issue, is the jobs crisis. We got to be very careful about bringing people into the country that drive down the rates of pay for entry-level workers. We have young people trying to get into the job market. We have insufficient jobs in America. And if we're bringing in illegal immigrants and giving them access to our job market, we may be driving down wages for Americans who are in the job market. And that strikes me as a serious problem, and I don't know how that would be resolved.
You know, being in the Senate, you're going to be looking at treaties. One of the concerns that people are coming to my shows periodically, and they're talking about some of these treaties that basically undermine our sovereignty and undermine our Constitution, whether it's Agenda 21 or some of these other issues. But is there any issues that you're finding that you want to address with some of the treaties that America's being involved with the UN or any other treaties that?
Yes, yeah, that the Senate's role is to approve treaties. Some of those that have engendered intense controversy are things that are good, arms control treaties that diminish risk of nuclear weapons getting into bad hands. That has come, those agreements have come through UN negotiating processes. There's a recent treaty that just was defeated in the United States Senate that would have subrogated the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution,
right.
The right to keep and bear arms for citizens, which is written into our Constitution for a very specific purpose. And so there is concern among, fortunately this was defeated in the United States Senate.
That's one of the real issues I was trying to get at.
Yeah. So some treaties are helpful,
right.
And the Senate votes on them. Some treaties are not helpful because they attempt to neutralize or subvert the United States Constitution, and no treaty can do that. I would not vote for a treaty that would subvert the United States Constitution.
That's really refreshing to hear.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty simple.
You mentioned that you're very involved with education, and we've seen over the last 30, 40 years, we've gone from one of the top in the world as far as our education system to 24th. What's going on? How do we fix this?
Yeah, two big problems, and I go back to my history in the state Senate. I'm a believer in. I mean, there are two models for education, and they're used around the world. These models. One model is a one-size-fits-all model. The federal government sets a curriculum and a standard, and imposes that upon the nation, and that doesn't really fit with America. We're a very diverse place. And the model that I prefer is one, and I wrote the state's charter school law. We have that law in place in New Hampshire. So obviously I believe in school choice. I believe that parents who, if given access to different types of schools that have different approaches to programs that fit the needs of different parents, different kids, kids in America are different, one to the other.
Right.
And if you try to fit a whole town of kids into one school, give them only one choice, you may have a school that's great for 80% of the kids in the town, but it's not great. It might be awful for the other 20%. So
right.
I believe it's a better model, an American model, that we drive control back to the parents and let the marketplace, it's the way we do higher education in America. We have thousands of different kinds of institutions of higher education. We have community colleges,
right.
we have that are heavily involved, the state government is involved, to completely private sector higher educational institutions. They vary across the board enormously. And so you ask, why do we have the best higher education system in the world? People flock to this country because it's a marketplace-based system where there are low barriers to entry, where students and parents choose.
And they flourish.
And they flourish, and they do well in America.
Well, that concerns me because recently brought to my attention by a few organizations, but one, there's a new federal program called Common Core. Are you familiar with that?
Very,
and it's another one of those issues that the federal government making us comply to a cookie cutter solution. Four bureaucrats voted it into New Hampshire. It wasn't even the House. It wasn't the Senate. It was 4 appointees by Governor Lynch that got this in. It got no fanfare.
Well, we have a competing model in New Hampshire. Actually, our State Board of Education, to its great credit, our former chair, Fred Bramante, a national leader, set in place a system of outcomes-based. In other words, students are given access to, through the public system, any means that they can use, whether it be internship at a private company, whether it be performing in an orchestra, to obtain the knowledge, skills required to show mastery of a particular discipline to get a course credit. And it was Fred Bramante's, and this is rule in New Hampshire. The State Board of Education did this, and it's a model that moves toward flexibility. It moves toward multiple means of access, and it's within the public system for people who back the public school system. So there are models that are more consistent with American values, which is freedom of choice, diversity, experimentation, innovation, instead of the one-size-fits-all approach. So we've seen standards-based education. That was only 15 years ago. That was supposed to save public education. We've seen No Child Left Behind. That was supposed to save public education. And so these things coming down from the federal government, those may work in some countries, but not in America.
It just seems to strike against the American chords of freedom,
We're a different-
independence,
we're a different place. Yeah,
individuality,
right,
and yet,
yeah.
you know, as individuals, we're one.
Right.
But we have to have that freedom to express ourselves.
Yeah,
So-
and this is not anti-public schools
No.
because Fred Bramante's model works within, the charter school model works within the public school system.
Oh, I hear people
Yeah,
from the
right.
teachers from the public schools
Yeah.
all the time want individuality. They don't want
yeah.
more and more regulations. They want the freedom,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
like we do.
Yeah.
They just, you know, their hands are tied.
Yeah, yeah.
So what differentiates you really from Senator Shaheen?
Well, I talked about the jobs, I talked about the debt and deficit problem, and the incumbent has apparently been, as far as I can detect, comfortable with the nation going so deep in debt that our fiscal house is burning down now. We're at the risk, and I've seen we're at the risk within some number of years of the bond market being cut off, of the federal government not being able to print more money to run programs. Right now, we're living on borrowed time. We have time to set up a reasonable glide path that won't create severe turbulence in Americans' lives to get our fiscal house in order. We have time if we start now. We cannot wait, as the incumbent seems to feel comfortable doing.
I've not
We
heard her
cannot
complain
wait.
once.
We cannot wait another 6 years for the incumbent to decide that it's time for someone else to start dealing with these problems. And among the problems, as I mentioned, is the third rail of American politics that no politician wants to talk about. I'm going to be talking about it because I believe there are solutions to restrain the growth of health care, bring the cost down, bring the quality up, don't have to push Granny over the cliff, do not have to cut off people's Social Security or Medicare, but we do need to make changes. We do need to engage the public in a thoroughgoing debate. So that's issue number one. Issue number two for me, I have two major issues, is the jobs crisis in America. We have a severe problem. If you look at post-2009, the percentage of adult Americans in the workforce has not gone up an inch since 2009. We have spent trillions of dollars, printed money, trying to fix the jobs crisis. It's not fixed. Right. Young people cannot get into the job market. Young people cannot get hired up to the skill levels that they've demonstrated. People of my age and younger, in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, who are perfectly capable, laid off, can't get back into the labor force. This is a problem of crisis proportions, so I'm proposing that we do a permanent change. First of all, we need to fix the corporate tax code. It's an anti-jobs tax code we have in the United States of America. It is so convoluted, it's so riddled with corporate welfare, it is so complicated, it is so Byzantine, that we have literally driven jobs out of the United States of America to other countries that have simplified their tax code. So we need to take away the complexity, simplify the corporate tax code, reduce the rate, and find a way to bring, and we know that there's $2.1 trillion of American corporate profits trapped offshore because tax codes in other countries, Ireland, for example, are better than the U.S.
I've heard that.
We need to bring that money back, private sector stimulus, up to $1 trillion to $2 trillion of private sector money, it's corporate money, bring it back to the United States of America to stimulate payment of dividends into people's retirement accounts, capital investment into new factories, jobs. That money will stimulate the economy. It is not printed money. It's out there.
Yeah.
Bring it home. Reform the corporate tax code. Reduce the payroll tax rate. So I want to simplify, streamline corporate taxes, reduce the rate of corporate taxes, reduce the payroll tax permanently. I want a tax code. We have an anti-jobs tax code. I want to change it so that we have a pro-jobs tax code. Cut the tax rates. Now, here's where I differ from some Republicans. Cutting taxes cannot be done by borrowing money from the Chinese. Republicans have done this in the past. We can't go there anymore. We cannot cut taxes and pay for it with printed money. Republicans have done that in the past. We can't do that anymore. So we've got to pay for tax cuts. And this is what gets controversial for me as a Republican. I'm proposing we address, change the tax code in the United States of America, tax pollution, which we don't want, use the proceeds on a dollar-for-dollar basis. Every dollar of a pollution tax goes directly into cutting the taxes on corporate profits, corporate capital formation, and jobs.
Is that like a carbon tax?
It's a carbon tax. We take every nickel of it, revenue-neutral carbon tax. Every nickel goes into cutting payroll tax, cutting corporate taxes, and simplifying those taxes. It's a pro-jobs plan. It's backed by Arthur Laffer. We know Arthur Laffer. Conservatives find him to be credible. Douglas Holtz-Eakin, former head of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Bush. It has been studied. It stimulates capital formation. It stimulates jobs. It stimulates the GDP. Yes, it requires changes. Yes, it requires me to explain this to Republicans as to why this is pro-jobs. It is pro-jobs. And it solves a pollution problem, and it solves a jobs problem.
Would you ever entertain a flat tax or anything of that nature? Or is that just too grandiose?
I personally find great interest, and I like something. You ever heard of the fair tax? A fair tax is,
yes.
okay, a fair tax is a consumption tax. And I've seen numbers on it. It's been studied, extensively. A fair tax, which I think is very appealing. I don't think it would ever pass the legislature because the changes. But a fair tax would institute approximately a 28% end user sales tax on all forms of consumption. Just end user. It's not a VAT tax. It's an end user consumption tax. You would get rid of the income tax, the payroll tax, the corporate tax. Gone, wiped out to zero. 28% would replace the income from those. Most taxpayers, individuals, would no longer have to file a tax form. Not just a postcard size, none.
I think that could be a popular.
That would interest me. The problem with this is the transition, because you'd have to get rid of all of the tax preferences in the individual tax code, the medical, the exemption from taxes from employer-sponsored medical care, the home interest.
It's 45,000
pages after pages of things that have been written by lobbyists, and the American economy is adjusted around these things, and so to transition from what we have now, but I believe I believe there's an appetite within Congress to simplify the tax code. We can make it much simpler. Right now we spend $300 to $500 billion a year complying with our tax code because it's so blasted complicated.
Yeah.
And that's not paying your tax. That's figuring out how much you have to pay.
Right.
And that's absurd.
And that's an industry in itself. Well, we're running out of time. So would you like to address the people of New Hampshire to?
I'll just say that I'm a Republican running for 2014 US Senate. I can win the primary, and I can bring to the American people solutions and talk about tough issues to deal with our debt and deficit problems. I'm going to talk about the third rail of American politics, and I'd like to address the jobs crisis. I have a plan on both that needs to be explained. I would like to do that, and I would like to go down to the United States Senate and work with peers there and solve American problems and end gridlock. We have got to start solving problems in this country.
Great. And how do people get in touch with you?
They can go to my website at jimrubens.com.
All right. I want to thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Senator. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
If you want to get in touch with them, please get involved, call them, and get on board. And Senator, I can still call you Senator because you were a senator.
I was a senator. Yeah,
so,
it sticks.
All right. Well, contact Jim Rubens at his website, and we appreciate you watching Gate City Chronicles, and we hope this is informative to you. So until next week, thank you for watching.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.